I'm going to call the City County Task Force on Disabilities meeting to order. And why don't we, our usual process is to go through the room, first having the task force members identify themselves, and then other folks in the room, if you could do that. My name is Paul O'Hanlon. I'm the chair of the task force. I'm going to pass it on to Chris Noschese.
Hi there. My name is James C. Noschese. And most people in the area, they just call me Chris. And I am the co-chair for this group. And next person, please.
My name's Joe Wasserman, task force member.
Corey Fraser, task force member.
John Tagg, task force treasurer.
I'm Mark Schmaler, task force member.
Task force member.
And I think that's all the task force members on the call at the moment. Other folks who are here who...
Yeah, hi, I'm Hillary Roman. I'm the ADA coordinator. Pass it over to Kaylin.
Hi, I'm Kaylin. I'm the county ADA coordinator.
Okay, and then I think the DOMI folks we can introduce later. So the first order of business is the minutes approval. Minutes were mailed out earlier. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Any additions or corrections?
This is Chris. I move to approve the minutes.
Cool. Let's see, is Leah on the call? I see that she chatted that she's here.
I see her now. Thank you for catching that.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, Leah.
Hey, Leah, welcome.
Hi, sorry about that. Thank you.
Sure.
Also on the minutes, second. Is that what
okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. Minutes are approved. Next order agenda item is the treasurer's report. John.
Hey, thank you, Paul. The treasurer's report. A lot of times I'll send the treasurer's report out. I didn't send it out this time, but I'll briefly go over it. As of the end of March, we have a balance of $3,252.50. That's our balance. We have 4 months of March, April, May, and June, which will have expenses for that. And so that will eat up a good portion of that, depending on what how long our meetings go and if there's any additional accessibility cost. So that would leave us with approximately $1,000. I'm estimating that for the end of the year. A couple questions, Paul. Are we planning on having an annual meeting in June?
We could. I mean, that's sort of up to us rather than me.
I was throwing that out there because because there is some money set aside for the annual meeting, and there's food there, although I don't think that would necessarily apply now. So there's additional money for that because our annual meetings normally run longer than our normal meetings anyway, so we allow for that. So that's also an option. Plus, the other thing is that there were several things we had talked about in reference to, for example, there is money available from another fund in reference to employment. I don't know whether you planned on having any meetings or whether you planned on having any executive committee meetings, which would then play into those costs also. I wasn't sure what you had planned So I figured I'd just throw that out there and see what you think about that, about how we can. I mean, I don't want to like say we got $10,000 left and we can spend it. We don't. We have some money left, which would allow us at least a couple planning meetings, I would think.
Okay. How about if we do this? Let's there's a distinct possibility we'll have time at the end of the agenda. So how about if we have time, spend some time, thinking about how we plan the next year and look at some of those issues.
Right. There are two things: planning out the rest of the year, the last 4 months. And then I was going to mention, and we can talk about, as you said, next year, as is known, I submitted a little higher budget to the county of $12,900, and that was approved by the county. So we'll have additional funds. We had added additional funds. One of the reasons we had additional funds for activities or events that the task force might want to do next year, which would tie into what you had just suggested about at the end of our meeting, talking about some of this maybe.
Yeah, I think the other thing too that, and we could talk about this later, but I mean, I'm just realizing I don't know what to think about the whole idea of kind of like in-person meetings and how soon or how realistic, or I mean, to some extent, I feel like there's some advisories yet to come out that kind of might inform us about the safety or lack thereof. But it would be nice to have a annual meeting where we actually had an in-person kind of social, but I don't know if that's realistic yet.
Well, anyways, that's kind of, I just wanted to update you on our current budget and let folks know that we were approved for the additional funds in our 2021, 2022 budget.
Okay, Chris?
Hi, this is Chris. So the general meeting, I would like to maybe focus on the job market, if you don't mind, for people who, have disabilities in general. Maybe we could push that, the employment and the job market around, because I feel like it's still poor and businesses around there. It seems like they're not hiring. But the government, they say the state government says, yeah, come on, we're hiring, let's go. But I feel like we're waiting and we're patient. And I think they're pushing more and more hiring, but I don't see the hiring happening. So that's all. I was hoping that maybe we could focus on that at the general meeting too. Maybe invite OVR counselors to come and discuss some things related to that. Maybe we could also talk about, invite some other people to come and discuss this and provide their perspective of what's happening. What are their services? What's left? Because I feel like people are suffering through that.
Okay, now, any other questions of John regarding the treasurer's report? I think that Chris's suggestion is a good one, although I'm tempted to, again, hold that for later in the meeting when we discuss kind of next steps. But one of the things I just want to remind all of us about is that one of the things that we talked about in the past around sort of supporting employment opportunities for people with disabilities is creating a late night transportation option when the buses and access shut down, and that a lot of people are looking for work that would be night shift. And so I think that, again, that might be one of the ways we look at supporting employment. But, I think there are a lot of different ways we could do that. But I just wanted to bring up that we have identified that as a problem for people who are working late. Okay, then, hearing no other questions, do I have a motion to accept the treasurer's report?
I move we accept the treasurer's report as read.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
As I second it.
Aye.
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 Okay, treasurer's report is, approved. Okay. Next on the agenda is, the, I don't know how to really phrase it. I guess the issue is something called intergroup relations policy, which is a policy of the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations, and kind of looking at it through the lens of the BRT process as kind of one way. And I think that Corey brought this agenda item up, and I think is prepared to say a bit about it.
Yeah, sure. So after our last meeting, when we looked at the BRT plan and the way that they are replacing a lot of the accessible parking with left side parking rather than right side parking, which is important for people who use wheelchair lifts or have other disabilities where they need to be able to get out to the curb, as well as for access vehicles. Wesley Speary from the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations reached out to me, and he talked to me about a process. So usually when you go through CHR, we talk about like a mediation and litigation process, which is more adversarial and based on complaints. Wesley brought up this idea of intergroup relations or community tension, which is a process that hasn't been used much since the 1990s during some unrest with policing, so specifically with community and police relations. And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of institutional knowledge, like that really needs to be refreshed. But it is one of the ways that the Commission on Human Relations could potentially open up something like a public hearing or another thing to intervene in this process where they're removing accessibility from uptown for a lot of people. And that's really significant because so like the BRT project involves a lot of different organizations and entities within the city, and two of them over which the Commission on Human Relations has jurisdiction is both DOMI and the Water Authority, both of which are kind of involved in the BRT process. So it's, sounds like this intergroup relations process could be really beneficial without a lot of drawbacks, but still looking for more information on the process. And I've been waiting for somebody to get back to me who has some kind of what's the word? Organizational memory of what the process looked like in the 90s, so we could understand more of what it would look like if the task force decided to pursue that. Personally, Paul and I talked about it, and I think that it's a good option because even if nothing else was accomplished, to open that process back up to the community and as a way to intervene in tension in things like this, it's just another tool in our toolbox going forward. And I think that would be really great, whether or not it would resolve the BRT issue.
I see Chris has his hand raised, and then I'd like to bring Wes into the conversation if he has anything to say.
Yes, this is Chris. I would love to add that the BRT, okay, the BRT's there. So one thing, wow, it's a lot of money. Millions of dollars are being poured into that. And where is that That's an issue. Where is that being kept? That's an issue. Also, the schedule, the timeline for the bus services is so limited. For example, of the bus services that's happening, they stop at 11 at night and they're not going around the clock with these bus services. So why even have a BRT in the first place if you're not increasing service? The BRT should be 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Keep it running. Why are we investing all this money in this? It's not going to be used and run like that. Also, the parking problem. Oh my gosh, all of the arguments with the parking problem. I would just love for people to be able to get in and get out on the right-hand side and park on the right-hand side. That would be perfect, just like it is now. What's the problem? I guess they just need to know that BRT should be focused on really the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week access to that, 365 days a year. It's just, I think it would really reduce headaches for the community because right now it's such a limited service area and we're just pouring money into it. And what is that money going to? They're not even listening to us. I think that it should be 24/7, really. That's my point. And yeah, back to Paul.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, Wes, do you have anything you would want to say or add? I'm not sure if, yeah.
I do, if you can hear me.
Yes.
I just had to move. I had a bad internet connection. So do you have a specific question or do you want some general information from me?
Well, let's start with the general information because I think that probably we're all learning about this together.
Okay, so some general information is that there are some provisions in the city code as well as our rules and regulations and a little bit in our bylaws about the commission trying to help with what are referred to as either intergroup relations or came to be called community tension issues. So that, to my understanding, was when there was sort of a broader based issue affecting a community in Pittsburgh or a group of people that might identify themselves as a community. I don't think of community as necessarily place-based, but it could be that or something different. Anyway, the idea is that the commission has, and it's written in city code, we have the authority to hold public hearings to try to address and understand those types of issues. It's different from our complaint-based process. Our complaint-based process is essentially that someone comes to us, they file a complaint saying they're discriminated against. It gets assigned an investigator. Investigator looks at all the evidence, then gives a recommendation to a subset of our commissioners who decide whether or not to move forward with that case, potentially eventually ending up in more of a court-style public hearing or even going to court itself. The kind of public hearing that I think would be in these community tension or intergroup relations types of cases would be more of information gathering and trying to seek a sort of resolution to the issue. But again, we've got to do some looking back at our history and see how this was done in the past. But that's my understanding of how it was done. Was there were issues affecting the whole community or sets of the community of Pittsburgh, like different groups, different, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So affecting different groups, different communities, and they would come to the commission. The commission would hold these hearings and try to see if they could work out a resolution between like the city and whatever group was in front of them. my understanding is it would probably be something similar to a model that is under federal civil rights law, and believe it's operated out of the Department of Justice. It's like a community relations council or community relations service, something like that. That's very similar. They'll go into different communities where discrimination is sort of a broad issue and potentially, is something that the government should be doing about, or might be at fault in, and reach an agreement, some kind of, maybe even a memorandum of understanding, and they would sort of oversee compliance of it. So that's sort of my background and understanding of where it is.
Mhm.
It's currently housed in our rules with our community relations committee. And so that's one of the things that in that meeting I have with them this afternoon, I've put on the agenda to start looking at. So that's an overview. If a group is going to come to us and they say, hey, there's this really big issue, we've identified these things as discrimination, we want to go by this community tension process, we don't want to yet file a complaint, then just like anything else, we're going to look at it and have to see what's there, and also look and determine if we've got the capacity to do it. I do have a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office, who I believe is employed by the Department of Justice, who could potentially also look into these issues without it necessarily rising to the level of a complaint, if they have the time and the resources to look into it. So there's sort of two options on the table. One would just take either one's going to take a little bit of work on my end. One would just take more than the other.
Okay. So, can I?
Can I say something?
Yes. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sarah, I just wanted to say something. I understand what Wesley said, and I know we have to talk about it, but I want to say something about Chris's comment, which is I don't really think the BRT should be 24/7. I think if we're going to provide transportation to people who work in a night shift, it should be direct contact, because the BRT goes through areas. I know once I was out at 1 o'clock in the morning and the police stopped me to see that if I was safe, but I was checking on my mother. And once my uncle was in Oakland and he was out late and he got robbed and he got thrown on the sidewalk and cracked all his teeth. So I don't know if 24/7 is a good way to transport people who work at night. And that's all I wanted to say about that.
Okay, I think that there's elements of the BRT that are kind of policy questions that don't really get necessarily to disability issues, but I think that to some extent the whole issue of nighttime transportation and so forth is kind of tangentially related to the BRT, but it's slightly different. I guess, Wes, the question I have is, just to kind of give a kind of sketch of my experience with the BRT process, which I can date back to 2014 was my first meeting I attended about this. And we've been raising this issue of the parking and which side the parking is for quite some time. And fortunately, in the past year, we've been directed to DOMI as opposed to Port Authority, that this is actually a DOMI issue rather than a Port Authority decision. So then we started a conversation with Domi. And I guess that my interpretation of where we are is that the ADA essentially is a law that establishes that people with disabilities have been discriminated against through a variety of mechanisms, including architectural barriers, and that it identifies barriers that exclude people with disabilities as being discriminatory, and that it appears that we're in a position where we're trying to establish for Domi that there's a reason that they shouldn't discriminate. In other words, it seems to me we're put in a position of establishing demand for non-discriminatory parking. And I guess that the question seems to me that seems absolutely contrary to the ADA, and that the burden shouldn't be on the discriminated people to demonstrate that they have a right to access, but the burden should be on the Title II entities, the governmental entities that have an affirmative duty to not discriminate, to explain why here they should be discriminated against us. And that doesn't exactly seem to be where we are. So my sense is that we're having very different kinds of conversations. And I guess the question is, give us a sense of how this process kind of navigates that. And is that a fair question?
So just to make sure I understand the question, are you asking how the community tension process and public hearing under that at the commission would navigate this?
I guess so. I mean, I guess that what in so many words, what I try to say is it seems that there's very different conversations happening, and that from my perspective, some of the conversations that we're being asked to have seem to be very misguided, or like just like weird, that people who have a law saying you can't discriminate against them have to establish a good reason that shouldn't happen, which I'm sort of aghast at that.
Okay, so I understand your perspective, and so I hope I don't say anything that accidentally dismisses it. What I don't want to do is make a statement right now that sounds like I'm reaching some kind of a legal conclusion in favor of or against someone in case the community decides to ask for this, or someone does file a complaint saying that they were discriminated against. At the same time, there are some very essential points and just rather basic, straightforward points that you raised, Paul, and that is that the Americans with Disabilities Act imposes proactive obligations on people, government entities, private public accommodations, employers, depending on the context. But when we're talking like public accommodations, if someone is going to be building something new or doing some renovations, then there are minimum accessibility standards that they have to meet. Now, as you would, I'm guessing, know from experience, if you want to file a complaint saying that someone didn't meet their obligations under the ADA, then unfortunately, yes, the way the legal system is set up, the burden of proof is on, excuse me, you, the complainant, proving that the defendant, public accommodation, whatever they are, a restaurant, a park, did not meet the ADA, and you have to show how they did not meet the ADA. And then there are some slim exceptions to things like if it's like an undue expense and burden, or the landscape of the area is like really, really hard for someone to make something fully accessible, but they still have to do as much as possible is what they have to do. So yes, there's a couple things that I'm hearing that sound very frustrating. That one, you're saying, hey, or asking, or just looking for confirmation. Aren't there proactive things under the ADA that people have to do? The answer is yes, as long as they fall under, as you pointed out, Title II for government. There are minimum standards and requirements. And then the other thing is, it's frustrating, but yeah, a complainant has to prove that if they want to bring a complaint, that the other person's violating it. And from what I've observed from being in these meetings is members of the task force and the public are trying not to go to the level of filing a complaint. They just want this to be resolved in the way that they feel that it should, in the way that they feel that it should be, is in line with the ADA saying, there are affirmative things you have to do, just do them to make this accessible. So I think what the public hearing process in a community tension case could sort of force maybe a party who's maybe a little bit more reluctant or unwilling to acknowledge the other party's side, kind of like through mediation. Maybe force isn't the right word, but get them to come to the table and actually understand the issue, and maybe even admit to the issue, and then agree to do something to fix it if there really is something to fix. And I'm trying to say if and those kind of words, because again, I don't want to make a statement sort of publicly in favor one way or the other, depending on what might happen in the future if there is a public hearing or a complaint that's filed. But that's what I think the process would be, is to try to reach a resolution that's going to be beneficial. And then maybe an example of a beneficial resolution is an agreement by the government entity that these are the minimum standards that it has to meet. And not only is it going to meet them here, it's going to continue to affirmatively look at them in all other projects. That's just an example of what relief might look like. Does that answer your question at all?
I mean, I think it gets us closer. So let me take other people's questions and then maybe they'll help us sharpen it. Next is Richard. Richard, you had a question?
Hello.
Hello, Paul and everybody. This has been great. And Wesley, I just wanted to pause you there and let you know we have already had this discussion for a very long time. And we do still have complaints, and we don't want to keep postponing this or playing games. We want to stop playing games and stop dragging on this discussion and make sure we take care of something now, because we don't want to have a big mess in the future, and we don't want to have to cast the blame anywhere. We want to take care of it now and not push it off until later.
Um,
And you can even look at the ADA workshop from 2011 from the Department of Justice, where the judge said that if the ADA approval has already happened, that from then on, you can't change it. You have to continue with those adjustments in the future. We can't be stubborn. We have to stick with what we've already earned.
Okay. I think that's a statement and not a question, but I agree. Okay, next is Chris.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Rich's comments are right. We need to stop playing these games. We really, we've been at this for over 5 years at this point, and we feel as though they're still not listening. They're still not listening to us. We are not seeing resolution. We are not seeing, anything being resolved there. We've got, we can talk all day long, and that's what's happening, but they're not actually listening and changing the process. So I think we need to take action starting today. We need to do it. And like I said, we need to do it. We need to stop putting it off, make sure they're not able to avoid us anymore, and require them to listen to our perspective, letting them know that we have a problem with accessibility in these various areas. These issues are still there. They're unresolved. And so I really think, again, we need to do that. Back to you, Paul.
Okay, I want to give people the opportunity to ask Wes any other questions, but I think that probably it would be helpful to frame this conversation as a to reach the decision about whether the task force would choose to initiate this process with the commission. So I think that this shouldn't really be seen as an academic conversation. Leah.
Hi. So I do understand, Wes, that you're being very diplomatic in the way that you're speaking about everything, and I appreciate that, which lends to its like seriousness, the gravity of filing a complaint. I don't see that as a negative, but I hear that in your comments that it almost makes it sound like it could have a much, I mean, obviously we would, if the decision went our way, that would be great and have a very positive impact. But what would be the negative impact if the decision didn't go our way? What would be the negative impact of filing a complaint?
That's a good question. I don't want to speculate or guess too much. That's a good question. So one of the things that I try to tell people, and I learned this, I used to represent people in landlord-tenant cases as an attorney, and now I'm not an attorney at the commission, but I keep my license. There's the possibility that, whoever you file the complaint against could get mad at you. I think that goes without saying in any situation. Now, there is the nice thing under the law that people are protected against retaliation. So if you filed a complaint or even just, asked for the review process, basically try to exercise your rights under the city code, then you're protected against retaliation, meaning that if someone wants to try to take it out on the task force or the individual members somehow by treating them harshly or taking some action against them that's unlawful or targeting them, then you could have another complaint to file against them. I mean, maybe the simplest thing that would happen is if it, quote unquote, didn't go your way, is that there would basically be no finding against the city that this time that they violated the city ordinance. Now, I do just want to clarify that when I say violated the city ordinance, so that everyone is informed in what kind of decision they want to make, and also understands part of the reason why I try to refer to federal agencies as well. At the commission, when it comes to public accommodations and the city government, we only have authority to enforce the city code. So we will look at, though, as examples and guidance, the federal law on the same issues. So when it comes to disability related issues, we'll look at the ADA and see what that says about public accommodations and the delivery of city services. Similarly, when we look at issue, if it's race, we'll look at the Civil Rights Act as well and see what that has to say. Now, one of the other important things is we're only going to have authority over things that happen within the city limits and other city government entities. So the Port Authority itself, even if it's doing something in the city, is a county entity. And so that's one of the reasons why if it looks like it's going to rise to the level of complaint, or if you at least want to try to talk to someone at the not district attorney's office, but U.S. attorney's office here in Western PA, I can put the task force in touch with that person, because it would need to be either someone maybe at the county, state, or federal level to have authority over the Port Authority. So that's kind of the other thing to keep in mind. But that would be like the Department of Justice enforces the ADA nationally. There's the possibility that what a county government entity like the Port Authority could be in violation of county code, or you could allege that they are. And so there's a county commission on human relations. We refer people there, they just don't have the capacity that we do. There's a state level Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, but I don't know how the nature or scope of their authority for something like this. But yeah, but there's definitely the Department of Justice, and we have, like I said, I have some contacts there. I've raised the prospect of talking to them about some of these issues, so they are open and willing to hear.
Leah, you have a follow-up?
Yes, a bit, I guess. I just wanted to find out if you feel like it sets a precedent for future complaints or grievances or even cases, if the city is found to not have to. Does each complaint decision affect future complaints? I mean, as they do, I suppose, in court cases. I don't know.
That's a good question. In theory, it could, and at the same time, it might not. Every case has to be looked at individually on its own merits, on its own facts and circumstances and evidence and everything else that's there. And there is some case law precedent from the appellate courts in Pennsylvania that sort of answer your question. And those deal with, and it's a case that dealt with a public accommodation. So there was some kind of a business entity that the Pennsylvania Commission at one point had determined was not a public accommodation, and therefore it did not have to fall under the protections available in the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. And so they were allowed to discriminate because they were not a public accommodation. But that same business had a complaint filed against it a few years later. And because they had changed the way that they were doing business around a certain activity, the commission at that point found them to be a public accommodation now. And the appellate courts held that that was okay because facts had changed. And so in one sense, past decisions by an agency aren't really binding if the circumstances and facts change. So we should be consistent with how we interpret the law, but if we see that there's a mistake or if the evidence changes, then a case could come out differently, even if it's against the same person.
So I have a question. that maybe Leah was asking, but if not, then it sort of spurred a question I have. So if I understand correctly, then sorry, what is this called? The intergroup relations process, as I understand it, is not per se an adversarial process. On the other hand, the commission has a complaint process which is by nature adversarial. Am I correct in that? That one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a correct assessment. I would say, if I could add,
yeah.
In the complaint process, we regularly and repeatedly make sure to let the parties know that mediation is an option at any time if they want to try to sit down and reach an agreement.
Got it. Okay. And then, so I guess the question that I have is, let's assume that we start off with this process that's more, say, mediation in nature, and that we reach a point where we decide this isn't working. We're then, I assume, free to initiate a complaint-based process.
As far as I know, I haven't seen anything in the city code that prohibits that. The thing that I would keep in mind is, and I can't really answer this question right now, is to have a claim under the city code, the claim has to be filed, the complaint has to be filed within 1 year of the last date that the legal harm occurred. And that's different depending on the situation. You know, being denied service one time at a store is like, that's a single incident. So you have a year from the time that one incident happened. Some things are what they call ongoing harm. So whatever harm it is continues to be repeated and it keeps happening over time. So as long as that harm is still continuing, someone has a claim against it. They just might be limited on how much of a claim the longer that they wait to seek some kind of relief. But yeah, I can't answer the question. One, I don't know enough, and two, it wouldn't be appropriate, I don't think, to know, you know, is this legally classified as an ongoing harm, or is each time there's a new decision its own separate harm?
Okay, that's good to know, but that's a little bit different, I guess, than what I was meaning to ask. What I really mean to ask is, you know, the whole appeal process, or to what extent part of what I hear in Leah's question is, you know, in terms of, well, what's the harm, is do we lose any option by starting this process? And my understanding is we probably don't.
Yeah, my understanding, again, I'd have to look at it, but I haven't seen anything that says that you do. And one of the things I'd probably look to guidance for is if it were complaint based and in the middle of the investigation, the two parties say, hey, we want to try to mediate and reach an agreement if we can. If they don't reach an agreement, the investigation just continues. And so it doesn't stop the possibility of the investigation continuing in complaint based. So again, I haven't seen anything that reads any different here. The probably the bigger thing to think and keep in mind is that 1 year limit, the statute of limitations on a claim that you might have under city code. It's going to be different under the ADA, the federal law. I don't know what the statute of limitations under the ADA.
Okay. Other questions? Anybody have any other things they want to raise at this time?
This is Rich.
Yeah, Rich.
I did want to let you know that sometimes when you have a conversation beforehand, they forget about us later in the process and they think everything's fine and go ahead. And they don't realize how important the things are that we said. Also, in the city, frequently they have high turnover in their staff. And so they forgot the conversation or they weren't involved in the conversation. And then we can't go ahead and get the changes that we need. And that makes it not a very smooth process. It's hard to coordinate.
Yeah, those are all good points. I think Paul's trying to talk and I can't hear him, but I would say that's one reason why when we mediate cases in the complaint or investigation process, the agreement's put down in writing and it's signed by everybody and everybody gets a copy. And that way, if someone's not following it or they can't remember what to do next, or they lose their copy, there's one that exists somewhere and you can hold people accountable.
Other questions? I think that we should bring this to a decision if we can. I guess the question I want to start with is whether people feel prepared to make a decision on the question of whether we would initiate this process with the commission. So maybe just if I could get a sense of folks if they feel ready to vote before we actually vote. Leah?
I guess I'm hoping that we could pursue it in steps. Like you said, there is the step that's less what is the word? Confrontational. I forget what you used. The one that Corey talked about. If we could get some information about that sooner than later, I mean, that would be my preference to go that way first. And then if that doesn't work, then try mediation, then try complaint. I mean, but I say that steps need to be taken ASAP.
But I'm a little bit confused if you're saying there's a step before mediation.
No, yes, the is mediation and the and Corey, I'm sorry, tell me what it's called again.
Intergroup relations.
Is that mediation or is that?
Yeah, I think that's considered a immediate I don't know what the word is, mediation type process.
Well, then I'm saying two steps, mediation and then the complaint based process.
Okay. Other people in terms of whether you're ready to vote. Chris, are you ready to vote or you have a comment?
Well, okay, so let's just clarify. Anything we vote on, okay, that's fine. But I'm wondering about voting on which thing we're doing. So when we look at it and then I want to actually decide a simple plan, like one page, something to say that we vote on this one thing, a brief vote, like we're voting on one thing. And then let them get back to us about that before we deny that. Because I'm wondering why, because if we explain to them, I don't want to have to go on and on and on and on and on and explain all this stuff to them, and then they'll just deny us, period. You know what I mean? So I would just say that maybe if we voted on I don't know, Corey, do you have something? You had your hand raised.
I was going to say, so I think maybe to clarify what Paul is asking, I think Paul is asking, do we feel ready to vote on whether the task force pursues the intergroup relations process, the less adversarial process that we talked about, that the Commission on Human Relations is going to have to learn some things about before they're able to implement, but is more of a conversation than an adversarial process like a complaint. Is that accurate, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think that fits my understanding.
Hey, Paul, it's John. Just a clarification, because of course Domi's on the call, and we are, based on the past couple of meetings, in conversation with Domi about this issue. So I'm wondering where we go from there. If we're not satisfied with that, then we go to Corey's process, or the human relations process on mediation. Is that part of the steps? If we're not, in other words, we're not satisfied with how Domi's handled this, then we could go to that next process.
Well, I truthfully, I would like to enlarge this to, I think there's a menu of issues that I could list that are essentially policy issues that we've been in conversation with the city about, everything from the one-step issues and PLI's inspection process, to sidewalk dining, to traffic circles, to parking around the BRT. And I think that overarching all of those conversations is that we're in a position of trying to prove that the city shouldn't discriminate against us. Like that we can establish that there's sufficient demand for accessibility, or otherwise they won't grant it. And I just think that there's something that's totally wrong about that posture, and that I'm kind of interested in initiating this process to change the conversation, because I don't think that we should be having that conversation. I just think that like it's the wrong conversation.
So are you suggesting that the conversation in this process should be broader than just a conversation about the BRT?
You mean in terms of bringing this to the human relations? Yeah, absolutely. I'm saying that the BRT is one of many examples that are pressing, that are moving trains, that we're essentially trying to prevent future discrimination, and that we really, should initiate this process.
See, that would make more sense to me if we were doing it in a broader context. That I think is a good idea, other than just narrowing it to the BRT, maybe even just one issue with the BRT. But I think that makes more sense to me.
Corey.
So I think that the advantage of doing it, of asking the commission to initiate this process with the BRT, is that we learn what it looks like. If we bring the, dozen issues that there are otherwise in DOMI and other city departments, we don't know exactly what to expect yet. So learning what to expect on a narrow issue where we can turn people out to speak at a public hearing is really important strategically.
I think that's a good idea.
And if folks are okay with it, I don't know if there are still people waiting to say something.
Well, Corey, would this be consistent then? What if we voted to, on the issue of initiating this process, kind of for it or against it, but then if we authorized you to work with the commission to kind of start it and kind of decide on the issues of focus and how many issues to bring?
I am okay with that, if other folks are okay with that.
So anybody have any kind of problems with that? So what I'm suggesting is that
This is Rich, I support it and I motion.
okay, so
I guess the other thing I'd say, Paul, is that, definitely you'll kind of be a touchstone no matter what in the conversation about this, is that particularly with the BRT stuff. I'd feel a whole lot better if there was a wheelchair user who was willing to kind of be parts of those conversations, because
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to put you out on the gangplank alone. I'd be happy to. How about if you and I then kind of work through this process with the commission in terms of selecting how broad or how narrow. But so the motion is that the task force reach out to the commission to initiate the community relations process, and that Corey and I would work with them to identify exactly how broad or narrow we would kind of frame this. Somebody, I think, seconded. Do I have a second for that?
I will second it.
Okay, Joe Wasserman seconded. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, I think that was approved then. Great, okay, so we will follow up with that and get back to the task force with kind of next steps, information, and follow up. So I want to move to the next agenda item, which is DOMI maintaining the public right of way. And I guess we have Aaron. We had it, yeah, Aaron and Charlie. So welcome.
Hi.
Who should I recognize? Aaron?
Yes.
Okay, hi, Aaron.
Hi, thank you to Hillary and the task force for inviting me today. My name is Erin Clark. I spoke with the task force sometime last summer, but I am a policy analyst with the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. I've been overseeing the outdoor dining and retail program that was stood up as part of our pandemic response last May, and has continued to be a much longer term program than we originally anticipated. But essentially, I wanted to come to this group today to provide just kind of a brief reminder about this program, as well as another opportunity similar to the discussion we had last summer to kind of open up the door to feedback, concerns, recommendations from this group relating to experiences that you have personally had or heard about regarding the outdoor dining and retail setups in the city. So I'm going to share my screen. Just want to make sure everyone can see that okay.
Yeah, yeah, maybe kind of say what's on the screen for those who can't though.
Yes, definitely. So this is just an introductory page. We've kind of referred to this program as Open Streets Initiatives because not only have we done some work in commercial districts for outdoor dining and retail, but we've also done some neighborhood slow streets, which are just some signs and cones in residential areas to try to slow down traffic. So this next screen just has text on it, but the original intention behind this program was, again, part of the pandemic response. And the question we were trying to answer was how we can use public space to better support our people and our businesses and do so safely, accessibly, quickly, cheaply, and equitably. I'm going to skip the next three slides. That was just a bit of background about the immediate response from last April. So this slide just shows a screenshot of DOMI's website for the outdoor dining and retail program, and just a quick summary of the program. It was intended to allow restaurants and other businesses to more easily apply for temporary sidewalk cafes, parking lane cafes, full street closures, and curbside pickup zones. And just allow some of our businesses and restaurants to reopen safely during the pandemic and utilize outdoor space. So this next slide just shows a photo of Oakland Avenue in Oakland, and there's a full street closure there for outdoor dining. So there's tables and chairs in the street while the sidewalk remained clear for pedestrians. So this is not as relevant to this group, but just for a bit of context, we've had barriers and some other materials donated for this program from the Urban Redevelopment Authority. So the city has worked with them. I, along with a few other city staff members in DOMI and in the mayor's office, have overseen this program and worked directly with applicants. This program is a bottom-up approach. So we have allowed businesses or business improvement districts or other community organizations to apply to the city for these changes to the public space. Some other cities have chosen to actually identify those areas at the city government level and do the street closures or implement space for outdoor dining or retail. And we have done the opposite, where we allow applications to come to us without predetermining those locations. This is an example of a sidewalk cafe. So there's a photo on this slide of a restaurant in Pittsburgh that has outdoor dining along the side of the sidewalk with along the frontage of the business, while the other half of the sidewalk is clear for pedestrian space. This is an example of a parking lane cafe. So the text on this slide is wrong, but there's a photo actually of 6th Street, I believe, downtown, where they have closed the parking lane and the for outdoor dining, and the sidewalk has remained clear. They've put in some temporary curb ramps along the space so that there's accessibility from the sidewalk down into the parking lane where the dining is. And then this slide is a full street closure. So there's a photo on this page, again, of Oakland Avenue, but a more recent use of Oakland Avenue in Oakland, where they have set up a mini golf course along with outdoor dining. So it's a mixed commercial and recreational use of the public space.
Do you want us to stop you at different points to ask questions about the images, or wait till the end and then find the image?
Paul, you're either way. I'm comfortable either way. I'm happy to jump back now if there's specific questions that you want to ask during, or I can also jump back at the end for specific.
I guess, I mean, as we're seeing all these kind of examples, I just want to point out that on the left of this image is what seems to be the nightmare scenario, where there's tables on the right and on the left of the sidewalk, and that the pedestrian route is we're kind of weaving through the middle. And that it kind of highlights how, if the tables on the building side were removed, you would have a clear walkway without obstructions, and that's typically not what's provided, though.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. That's very helpful. I think working with Obid on this, which I think is just reiterating your point now as we're looking at this photo. But I think we tried to keep the space on the right of this image, which is the other sidewalk, fully clear, But of course, that would require, because this is a full street closure, but of course, that would require going down to cross at the crosswalk down on the other side of Oakland in order to only use that half of the street. So I think that's exactly the type of feedback that is helpful for me to pass on to our team and to applicants as they're submitting site plans for their tables and chairs. So they are required to maintain at least 4 feet of space between those two tables. But to your point, that puts pedestrians moving directly between diners on either side, which is an uncomfortable experience, not only during regular life, but particularly in a pandemic. So I think that's definitely helpful feedback.
Well, and the other thing I would just say is that I wouldn't want to start a planning process where I gave up access to one side of the street on the theory that the other side provided access. It just doesn't seem to me that that's where we should be starting.
Yep.
And we have questions from Georgia and Rich. Georgia, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, so for those on the call, I am Georgia Petropoulos, and I am a member of the task force, but I am also the executive director of the Oakland Business Improvement District, and we did do this street layout. So I just wanted to, this is great feedback, great ideas, and thanks for, in particular now, Aaron, you showed the image that had the activity installation of the mini golf that was submitted in. I think one of the things I just wanted to note for everyone on the call to understand is the seating that you're seeing currently on the left, which is the extended seating, those are actual seating of the individual storefronts because they have a liquor license. What ended up happening is the quote unquote sidewalk was actually moved to the street. So there is a 5-foot width left between where the mini golf currently is, which by the way, the mini golf was also designed to make sure that it was accessible so that individuals in wheelchairs will also participate in the mini golf, all individuals. And then between the mini golf and the seating that you're seeing on the right is actually also a continued throughway for movement. So I think it's just the image is a little deceptive because of the foreground that we're looking at. But yes, there is definitely adding it. When you added in the mini golf activity, it did sort of reduce down the width of what was left on the street for movement, in addition to the sidewalk, as Aaron noted. So just the challenge with this was how to continue to allow public seating that involved serving alcohol, which is what the seating on the left is doing, which is why there's an ADA ramp at each of the individual entryways, because in effect, the street became the sidewalk. And then there's ramps that go into each of the 4 storefronts of the businesses. It was quite complex, but this is just wanted to just note that. But these are great. This is great feedback coming back from everyone. And Paul was so noted on your comments too.
Well, okay. Now let me ask a question, because I mean, one of the things that we've been pressing the city about for years is that when you look at the sidewalk, the business side of the sidewalk is typically the side without obstructions, and the curb side has all the, everything from trees to newspaper things to, just all kinds of obstructions. And typically what we're given is the half of the sidewalk with all the obstructions. And the question is, why is it that we're choosing to have sidewalk dining be on the side that provides the best access? And so I guess the question I have is it the case that the liquor license requirement actually requires it to be on the building side? I mean, what are the constraints that we're working with? Because if this is just up to the city, I think the city's established that there's a way to do it where we provide access on the building side. And
Yes, yeah, I can answer that, Paul. At the time when this was installed, which was actually a year ago now, was the planning that began. This began in March of 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. Yes, the PLCB had a ruling that they called you must provide a contiguous zone of seating, so you couldn't have anything interrupt seating where people would be served alcohol, and that includes a sidewalk. So if as what you're recommending, for example, the image here you can see on the left is Fuel and Fuddle storefront. That is a restaurant with a liquor license. They do have tables and chairs immediately in front and adjacent to their front facade, to the front of the building. Under typical circumstances, that's where the tables would be. Then you would have the sidewalk, the curb, and then you'd have a parking lane. But in order to add more seating, as we did, we took over the parking lane and we extended the sidewalk. We literally extended the sidewalk with a deck. The PLCB would not allow the business to serve the tables and chairs on that additional deck, which provided additional seating, because a sidewalk interrupted it. So that's why we moved the sidewalk into the street. So you would traverse the street as if it was a sidewalk going north-south on Oakland Avenue. It is complex. At the time when this was laid out and designed, that's how the ruling had to come in order for those storefronts to be able to serve alcohol and get more seating. So the sidewalk, what's understood as a right-of-way sidewalk got moved into the street, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I have a comment.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to I worked before at the School for the Blind for many years, and I know many of the staff would transport
the delivery from the loading dock.
So I'm curious, I have a question for Joe Wasserman if he's on the call. I just wanted to ask, is for the blind community, the interpreter's clarifying.
So, but okay.
I'm just wondering if there's a lot of blind people who live in Oakland, if Joe could answer that.
Yes, there's probably a greater concentration of blind and visually impaired people in the Oakland area as opposed to any other municipality that you could mention around the city. I'm not sure what you're driving at, what you want.
Well, hey Joe, while you're talking, I guess the question I wanted to ask is on the issue of where the sidewalk dining is located on the sidewalk. Does it matter for blind people whether it's on the building side or the curb side?
It all can be rather confusing because, you know, what happens, maybe the store people place the tables and chairs very properly and according to all kinds of jurisdictions and so forth. But when John Q. Public comes in for their lunch and they start moving chairs around and bumping tables and what have you, the setup isn't going to be the same at 3 o'clock in the afternoon as it was 10 o'clock in the morning. I know that's probably not answering your question, but certainly the clear lane on the business side would be better because, as you've indicated, the curb, and I don't care if the curb is separate from an extension of the sidewalk into the street. You know, so this is certainly a new concept to me that we've got extra seating and dining out in the street, and those people aren't allowed to be served liquor now because the sidewalk intervened. It's amazing. Poles, garbage cans, trash cans, traffic light boxes, a myriad of things on the curb. It makes it very difficult for traveling.
I just wanted to step in to acknowledge something and ask maybe clarification to be sure I'm understanding correctly. So generally from the feedback that I received from the task force last summer, we have refrained from allowing, except for full street closures like you saw on Oakland Avenue, dining on both sides of the parking of the sidewalk or in a parking lane and on the business frontage of the sidewalk to prevent pedestrians having to move through diners on both sides. So that was helpful feedback that we have been implementing on our sidewalk cafes and those areas with parking lane cafes. However, I think something that I maybe misunderstood last summer was the preference for the diners to actually be on the curb edge. I think our focus was to ensure that diners were either on one side or the other, and of course not both, even where 4 feet could be maintained. So there is a preference for diners to remain on the curb edge or parking lane and not on the business frontage, even though doors are opening and people are moving in and out of businesses on that side of the sidewalk more frequently. Is that correct?
Well, I lost you at the end. I guess that, let me say it this way. For probably, I mean, certainly way back when Richard Meritzer was still alive, we were talking about the whole process of how the city selected the building side versus the curb side. And we were given all kinds of reasons why it is absolutely impossible to move the sidewalk dining to the curb side. And then the pandemic happened and we started to see sidewalk dining on both sides. And we said, that's the worst nightmare. But the truth of the matter is that consistently we've said that putting the sidewalk dining on the building side rather than the curb side ends up with basically an obstacle course for pedestrians, worse for people who are blind or in wheelchairs, because a lot of the obstacles are things like tree pits and things like that a wheelchair can't easily go over, or sometimes the tree pit in fact is a hole. And so, you're driving around and all that. And so again, the fact that it couldn't be done and then the pandemic happened and then it was done makes me think that we gave up too easily. And that if it's the liquor license issue, then maybe we exempt bars. But again, I think that there's a discriminatory result in putting the sidewalk dining on the building side.
That is very helpful. Thanks for providing that information. I think what has happened, to your point of why all of a sudden this is okay or permitted during the pandemic, is the liquor license issue you're talking about. So the law, as Georgia started to reference, reads, I think, that the service had to be contiguous to the business, which meant, along the frontage. And so that's why sidewalk cafes were always put there for liquor license reasons. The PLCB, the Liquor Control Board, has waived that at least temporarily. My understanding is this is something that will likely be waived more permanently, that contiguous requirement. And so we will now at the local level have more flexibility to locate these sidewalk cafes in the parking lane or on the curb lane. So I think that recommendation, although I totally hear you that that's been being made for years and years, but I think we now have an opportunity to actually implement that policy as part of our reviews. And so getting those parking lanes always on the curb lane to maintain the other half, or, you know, the accessible space on the sidewalk along the business frontage, I think is something we can actually implement now at the local level.
Georgia, did you have another question? Or is your hand up from before?
Oh, so actually I do. I just wanted to get some clarity on some pieces. So in situations where there may not be obstructions along the curb edge, but now if you have a parking lane adjacent to it, you've now opened up a scenario where cars that open their doors are going to be hitting tables and chairs along a curb edge. So I guess, Aaron, there's a question on, have you seen restaurants that were able to pull off the curb edge seating enough to provide walking along the sidewalk, but have a distance from the curb, from a parked car, opening and closing doors? Does that make sense?
I think so. I haven't received any complaints from businesses about that arrangement. And of course, you know, the safety and accessibility of our pedestrians should come first in these policies, especially when we have the flexibility now at the state level in some of these rules that existed previously that are now being more relaxed in light of last year. So yeah, I mean, I think that's another piece of the puzzle, is whether or not we can safely even put tables and chairs along the curb edge where the parking lane still exists. And whether the tables and chairs, we've already been making sure that there are never tables and chairs along an accessible parking space. But of course, you know, that's accessible parking, designated accessible parking spaces aren't the only parking spaces used. And so I guess another piece of this puzzle is whether or not tables and chairs should be along the curb edge where there are parking spaces that could prevent doors from being opened or people from getting in and out of their vehicles. But I think this is just bringing to light probably why I should be, and our department should be checking in even more regularly than semi-annually to kind of work through some of these questions and issues.
Yeah, and I'll just say we have an example on Forbes Avenue where we did put tables and chairs along the curb edge, and because the sidewalk was generous enough, it left room so that a door could open. But that's only because it was a moment where you had a fairly wide sidewalk. So just wanted to put that out there to think about. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I speak for everybody in the sense that I think that we all like sidewalk dining and want to encourage it, but I think that we don't want it done in a way that compromises mobility, and it done in a way that respects everybody's rights.
This is Rich. I have a comment.
Yeah, Rich.
On Forbes Avenue, when you're going south, sometimes it's pretty narrow, but on Fifth Avenue, I feel like you get much larger spaces. That's what I've noticed. I remember that from my time in the city. Fifth Avenue would be a good place with much more space.
Any other questions, comments for Aaron. Aaron, I don't know if we've interrupted or if there's more that you want to finish with.
I just want to wrap up quickly to first of all welcome any feedback or comments. I can put my email address in the chat. It's Erin ERIN.Clark CLARK at pittsburghpa.gov. Feel free to reach out to me. I also have tried working closely with Hillary, and Hillary has passed along feedback that she's received to me. But just this last slide here, we do have additional information on DOMI's website now and an engaged PGH page where we're trying to continue to collect feedback on these programs. And so if you have any specific feedback, you can submit it to any of those lines of communication, me, Hillary, or through that engaged PGH page. But the feedback that I've heard today, and I'm sure that all of you have, is really helpful. Of course, it's might not be a surprise that we're getting interest from businesses and community members to expand this program more long-term to allow for more outdoor dining in public spaces. But if this is really going to be something more long-term and not just a pandemic response, we need to really do it right and be sure that we're maintaining accessibility for everyone. And so please, please, please don't hesitate to reach out. But I will leave it at that for today. Thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. Okay, did anybody have any other questions or comments on the sidewalk dining issue before we leave it? I mean, I just my personal editorial. I think that again, the example of the pandemic and all of the experimentation, I would say, with sidewalk dining and how to do it, and sidewalk bump outs and all kinds of stuff. I frankly have been happy to see, but it sort of has reinforced for me the frustration before about getting the city to look at this sort of which side are you going to take from a accessibility standpoint, and it does trouble me to some extent that our accessibility rights could be compromised because of the ability of people to drink on the sidewalk or other things that seem to be not exactly protected by federal civil rights law. So there's a part of me that's a little bit frustrated that it's taken a pandemic to get us to consider these things. But that's my 2 cents. Okay, any other questions, comments? I think that probably I would move to the next agenda item, which is if we have any new business or any comments on any other subject that people want to bring up, since we have a few minutes.
Hey, Paul, it's John. I thought we were going to talk a little bit about planning.
Oh yeah, let's do that. Good. So we have essentially a whole year of funding starting in July. We have essentially a whole year of kind of things to start planning for with a budget. So what do people think we should do? The things we've heard about so far include advocacy around nighttime transit as a employment initiative. What other things do people think? Obviously, we've talked about starting an initiative with the Human Relations Commission around one or more policy issues around access. What else do people think? The two things that I've said that keep me up at late at night worrying that we should be doing something are A, the county jail, and B, nursing homes. I think that both of them are catastrophes for people with disabilities. Other ideas that people have?
Paul, let me just add to this 1 second. A lot of the expense connected with what we're talking about will be about meetings, committee meetings. So if you form a committee and you have several meetings, that's where the expense will go to for the accessibility of the meeting. I don't anticipate a lot of money spent on having speakers and stuff like that, or food or anything like that. So that's just a comment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it could include, though, I mean, bringing in speakers or having, events. I think that we haven't always had the budget to really consider that, but I think that we could. I know that one of the things I've talked about is it seems to me that we don't really have a disability community development kind of process, in the sense that when I look at what's going on around whatever the hell they're calling El Mono now, Hazelwood Green, or whatever that is in Hazelwood.
Hazelwood Green, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, it's a giant development, but as far as I can tell, the greatest sort of vision of accessibility is they put in some curb cuts. But I don't really see any vision for accessibility in our development. Beyond curb cuts and very minimalistic things.
Oh, this is Joe. I want to make a couple of comments and suggestions.
Yes, Joe.
First of all, with regard to transportation, I think the nighttime transportation could be extremely critical for employment purposes. There's a House Bill 1697 that's just been introduced in Washington, and it seems that a good portion of the money is to be directed toward paratransit systems. I think paratransit system transportation is the way to go to try to get, if we ever do get it, nighttime transportation for those people that, for whatever reasons, confined and have to work at night. We're not going to get the BRT to run 24 hours a day. I think you've got a real battle there, Chris. With regard to how we can efficiently spend some of the money that we've come into, along with the monies that were allocated toward employment for the veterans 2-3 years ago. We've talked now for about 2 months, inviting people from Achieva, from OVR, from maybe even Goodwill, places that do employ disabled individuals, to come and talk with us at a meeting or at a special committee meeting, to try to get something started with regard to better employment for the disabled. We need some data. How many disabled people are employed in the various agencies throughout the whole city complex, for instance? I don't think we know that. You and I have talked a couple of times. You've mentioned the jail, the nursing home. We need to get individuals that represent these entities, maybe to come to a task force meeting and let them hear what we feel they need to be doing more for the individuals that they're serving. I guess that's about enough.
Cool. Thank you, Joe. Corey, I think I saw your hand.
I just wanted to say to what Joe said, is that I think whenever we're talking about employment, we have to be really careful about who we are inviting. Joe mentioned Goodwill, and I'm not sure how many folks know that Goodwill is one of the organizations still existing in the state that hold a federally sheltered workshop license, meaning they can pay disabled people sub-minimum wage, and that's not acceptable. And I just want to make sure that we're really cognizant of that when we're talking about which organizations can help us get employed and can help us do the things that we want equally, right?
I'm very aware of that complication, Corey, and I certainly understand what you're pointing out, and it's certainly worth pointing out, but it's such a terribly complicated area.
I think I saw Richard. Did you have your hand?
Yes. I agree with the evening transportation for people with disabilities. The problem with access being closed at 11 or 11:30, there's nothing you can do. You're stuck. And sometimes some people with disabilities are dependent on their family or their spouse to drive them. And that's not good. If they have something last minute that comes up, what if they're sick? Who's going to help them? They won't have any transportation. So I do think that's an important discussion to have access to 24/7 transportation. I know that some people with disabilities work in the evenings or overnight, and that's very frustrating. It's been a problem for many years.
Chris.
Thank you, Rich, for just bringing up that issue again. Specifically for people who are ill. That happened to a friend of mine, and that person is an incredibly independent person, but is unable to drive. And it happened that they got very sick in the evening. It happened about 1 a.m. And he is not real favorable to 911. So he waited until the morning, when the bus transportation opens, and he was able to hobble to get on the bus, and they actually brought him to the hospital, and he passed away upon arrival. So there's an example of why we definitely need 24/7 transportation. I was just reminded of that person, and he passed away because he couldn't actually wait for transportation in the morning. He tried to, but he had a heart attack and he passed. And like I said, he's an independent person. He, he wasn't trying to beg for anything. It was just who he was, to be independent. And so he waited for the bus and he died. So again, that serves as an example. Rich, I'm really glad you brought that up. 24/7 transportation is needed for those individuals who cannot drive.
Sarah had her hand up next.
Yes, I'm glad to hear all of this interest in transportation, but I did want to make a comment to something that came past my desk that I think I saw. I don't know if anyone else saw it, but it was about the sheltered workshops. And I read there's a new bill in the House that if you're paid sub-minimum wage, they won't deduct anything from your Social Security or Social Disability payments. There's a bill in the House to pass that. I don't know if anyone else saw that. I think it's something I saw, but it's a way I've been on both sides of the fence with talking to people about sheltered workshops. And some people want competitive employment, and some people like the sheltered workshops. So I just wanted to bring that up as something that I've read.
Georgia.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, John, and the committee for getting funding in for the new budget. This is amazing. I just wanted to put out an idea. So far, I've heard 5 really great initiatives, possible opportunities, possible advocacy recommendations from the committee. So one of the ideas that I've been thinking about for quite some time is, the city of Pittsburgh, and Hillary and her team do a really good job of describing the commission, the goals of the commission, what the commission's doing on the City of Pittsburgh website. Would there be funding available to maybe do some additional communications? For example, could there be a quarterly newsletter and we slowly build up sort of a list and a listserv and open to the public, so that we can continually be out in front of the public, and we can be out in front with recommendations and ideas and increased participation and attendance and anything the commission felt it needed. But it's also just really increasing awareness of the commission, as well as suggestions and recommendations. So that's an idea I'd like to throw out.
When you say commission, you mean task force, right?
I mean, I'm sorry, the task force. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry,
right.
Paul.
I kept translating. Okay.
Maybe in my mind with you, it's that hopeful. Yes, the task force. Yes. But there's just great recommendations, great suggestions, great achievements that the task force is doing. And just to have a regular sort of more putting who we are and what we're talking about out more to the public. So I'm just recommending something like, for example, a newsletter, but that does take time. It does cost. It could take professional company to help out. So I'm just throwing that out. I don't know if we would have the funding for that.
Good idea. Cool. Any other thoughts? Any other issues, burning issues, pet peeves, concerns? If not, I mean, I think that we've certainly gotten a lot of ideas worth pursuing. So if people don't have anything else, I think we're a lot. So this is your last chance. If not, I'm going to close this conversation. Probably, I guess that like we did before, where Corey and I sort of took on taking the next steps with the commission. I guess the question is, who wants to take on taking the next steps around, I think the nighttime transportation is the one that probably we had kind of the most positive comments about. Does anybody want to? It seems to me that I'm hopeful, without knowing the details, that there might be money in this new stimulus package that could actually be used for this purpose. But I guess the question is whether, a conversation with Port Authority and Access would be the place to start. I think that, we could look at other places as possible funding sources, but those would be the 2 places I think that we would need to start with. Anybody have any thoughts on that, John?
Well, I guess my only concern would be sitting on the Port Authority board, whether there'd be some conflict there or not.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, that's my only concern, Paul. I mean, it might not be any issue at all. I mean, because I remember Evelyn Stapula, God rest her soul, talking about this issue years ago and working on it. I remember that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see Rich's hand. Yeah, Rich. You're muted. Okay.
So Oh, gee, I can't think of what I was gonna say. Hold on 1 second. Something about transportation and the situation. Oh, never mind. Go ahead. I can't remember.
Okay, well, I guess, I mean, I understand, John. I mean, it doesn't, I mean, perhaps what would be useful is if you got back to us, if you could let Port Authority know that we would be interested in initiating a conversation, find out like who we should talk to.
I'd be glad to do that. I mean, obviously, that's really easy to do. And once let me gather some information first, and, because it's going to require probably a conversation, with Access, because obviously the Access runs later than some of the Port Authority routes do. So I think any conversation would probably include Access. So let me follow up, and then I will get back.
Good. I mean, here's what I imagine, that there's an initial process where we have a conversation with Port Authority and Access, and that we consider a process after that where we also invite the United Way, the Pittsburgh Foundation, and other entities about a pilot program or something. But, I think that starting with Port Authority and Access makes the most sense.
Okay, I'll get back in touch.
Cool. Okay.
This is Rich. I remember what I was gonna say.
Good.
It just popped back into my head. So with the problem with people with disabilities, having to contact
Uber and Lyft.
And to take an Uber or a Lyft, that's a problem with transportation. It's not easy for us to do because you have to make a bunch of phone calls, or use, the apps on your phone, which we could be stuck with that. So I just would like to, bring that up. We need to improve the apps. Uber and Lyft are not always accessible.
Right. I mean, I think Uber and Lyft present not only accessibility issues, but I mean, the truth of the matter is, for a lot of people who are working minimum wage jobs, it ends up that the cost of the transportation pretty much wipes out their earnings, and they're just working to, they're just working to be busy because they're not earning. But anyway, okay. Well, I think that we probably have enough of an idea of next steps. Chris, I see your hand.
Yeah, okay. I think, it's time for us to get some type of representative from the Port Authority or from Access, either one. Perhaps they could come to us, come to our regular meeting so that they can hear from a variety of different perspectives about these issues. And I think, I think letting them sit in on a monthly basis might be a good idea, because we've been bringing up these issues regularly, and Port Authority and Access just have no idea. They don't know. They're totally unaware about that. They don't know that we're doing that. And, they don't even know that we exist. They don't know that we've had these issues historically and in an ongoing way. And Port Authority and Access, like I said, they just have no idea. So I think that it's time again that they become permanent fixtures at this meeting and can hear from the different perspectives that are present here. I think it's time. I think they should be here.
Yeah. Well, truth is that Access is Karen Hesh, and Access is on the call, and typically they are part of this. So I think that Access is aware of the issue. I think the Port Authority probably is, but I don't know who they would designate as being like the point person to work with us on this. So why don't we reach out to them and then move forward. So all right, I see that it's about time. Is there anything else on this? Otherwise, I want to I guess, call for a motion to adjourn.
This is Rich. I have a comment.
Oh.
I just wanted to say I was laughing at what Chris was saying. I've been using Access for many years, and I know there are just a lot of problems. There's so much staff turnover with them, and you know that's it. That's it with them.
Sarah, oh, sorry.
And so, and I saw last week recently that, you know, the Dan Miller, the Disability Summit, Disability and Mental Health Summit. I saw a lot of awesome stuff there.
A lot of people have made changes because of COVID and improved the environment for people with disabilities. That's been wonderful to see.
I have a comment about the transportation.
Yeah.
I'd like to see it available to people who are working full-time in minimum wage jobs, not just people who are on benefits. You know what I mean? Because people who are working at minimum wage jobs and have to take public at night, like you said, Paul, are working and don't have enough to contribute to an Uber or a Lyft or a car.
Yeah, no, I think the assumption is that probably most of the people with disabilities working nighttime wouldn't be receiving disability benefits. Their earnings, you know, so yeah, I think that that's exactly who we have in mind. Sarah, I agree.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's 4 o'clock. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
All right, I think Chris seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
All right. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Have a great month. I mean, enjoy the weather. Get your vaccines if you haven't yet. And enjoy the spring.
Everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.